I'm an immigrant. My family and I came here from Cuba. Speaking of politics, because we're Cuban.
Right,
I mean, if we were Haitian, I wouldn't be talking right now.
right, right, right.
So I
Did
am.
you go to Miami?
Yes, yes, we did. So we went from Cuba to Spain to Miami, and then we.
Okay.
I grew up in Houston, Texas.
Yeah, you have no accent at all, but
It's one of the benefits of being here, at the age of 4.
oh yeah. Yeah. I was
And
at Homestead Air Force Base when Andrew hit, and I loved it down there. Loved it.
yeah,
Cuba was actually my job when I was based there.
really,
Yeah.
meaning, what would you do in Cuba, or what would you do
I,
about Cuba?
well, it depended, whatever was required. I mean, I was an F-16 pilot at the time, so yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. It wasn't, they were, their fighter pilots were driving around on bikes. They were in bad shape in the 90s, to say the least.
So wait a minute, you're starting to say that their pilots were on bicycles? Is that what you said?
They were driving around on bikes to train because they didn't have enough fuel to fly their MiG-23s, their fighter jets. So they were like, they would practice their in formation on bikes to practice their techniques. So even
Well,
though that was our job, it wasn't, they're not a military threat, to say the least.
right. I tell you that's. I don't know if I was a pilot of any type, much less a fighter pilot, and I'm on a bike,
Yeah, it's
my
not.
confidence is going to be pretty
Yeah.
low.
Well, it's not 1961 anymore. So,
Right.
the thing about Cuba that is such a tragedy, like it's gorgeous. When you see it from space, it's surrounded by all these blue water. It just looks like the most beautiful place. When you see it in James Bond movies, you're like, it looks like a really cool place. Then we just need to get past this. Open it up. Let the tourists go. Do some business. We need to get past
The
the
embargo.
stupid government that they have, the communist government. Yeah, exactly.
Well, and again, here's politics for you, right? Whether you like it or not. And when I say this, some of my Cuban families get very upset of me. They Castro, whatever you want to call it, he won because they're still getting tourist business from Mexico. They're getting tourist business from Europe, from Canada. The only place that they're not
Right,
getting business from is us, unless you and I first go to Mexico or Canada and then go into
right,
Cuba. Um, so it like, and I agree with you. It's time to say, okay, look, let's figure out a way to work with these people because
right,
nothing's changed. I mean, we tried. It's not like it's not like the U.S. just turned a blind eye. They tried multiple ways, including diplomacy,
right.
including force. For whatever reason, it didn't work out. So let's make it happen. I mean, one of the things that I'm most proud of as as an American is the fact that Japan is one of our allies.
Mhm.
Here is a ruthless fighting force. I mean,
Yeah.
they did some horrible things to our troops. We slaughtered them.
Mhm.
We kicked their butts, and now they're one of our allies. So
Yeah. Same
it
with
goes.
Germany.
Yes, thank you. So it goes to show you that a bitter enemy can become an ally,
Yeah.
and it doesn't have to be a permanent thing unless
No,
the egos get in the way.
at the end of the day, people are people. It's the government that
Yes.
screws things up.
Yes.
So if we have a freedom-loving democracy, generally things will go pretty good. And if you have, one man at the top who's dictator for life, who wants to make his country great again, things won't go so well. So,
Right.
but the people are people, and the benefit that Germany and Japan had is we won, like we defeated them. The problem that Russia has is they've never been defeated. Like they've
Right.
lost a lot of battles, but they've never lost the war. And until that happens, you end up with this continuous stream of either the Soviet government or corrupt oligarchy. Putin is just a mafia boss, and until you get defeated, you're kind of stuck with what you have. But they say the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and hoping for a different result. we've been trying this with Cuba for the last 50 years. It has not worked. So,
Right.
you should try something else.
And you know what? I tell you something else. And this is, again, this is unfortunately very political. And I am not, uh, to be clear, I'm not a big Hillary Clinton fan. I think that, you know, I'll just say that I'm not a big
Yeah.
Hillary Clinton fan. However, I do agree with the fact that many years ago, uh, she said, in order to move the relationship forward, talking about, I can't remember which terrorist group or which hostile group, I know it was in the Middle East. She said, we have to learn we have to learn about them and we have to try to understand them. Not that we have to agree with them, but that we have to understand them. And of course, she was lambasted for that, right? She's a commie, she's weak, she's liberal, she's this. But honestly, you cannot get an agreement with somebody and really hope to keep that agreement if you don't understand them. I mean, that's why anybody who's ever had a teenager in their house, let me tell you, those are the worst years because you don't understand what they're doing. They don't understand what you're doing. And it's some of the worst times for a parent. But until you understand what they're really going through, then you can say, okay, I get it. I understand where they're coming from. Let's try this.
I've got my Taylor Swift playlist here. So, and what you're really talking about is nuance and subtlety and openness and understanding. Those are qualities that are really missing from some of our loudest politicians today in America. I read a funny book about, or it was an article about why the Brits couldn't stand Donald Trump, because he has no sense of humor and he has no sense of irony, right? Like they like some nuance and like getting to know people and understanding people. And that doesn't mean that you can all hold hands and sing Kumbaya. We tried that with Russia after the Soviet Union collapsed. We tried it with China for the last 20 years. We've kind of given away the family jewels to China if we just engage with them, they'll become freedom-loving democracy. No, they won't.
Right.
When you got one man at the top who's dictator for life and he wants to make his country great again, that's going to end badly. And we need to open our eyes to that. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't take the time and effort to understand people, because I've always said I'd love, if I was the ambassador of Russia, the first thing I'd do would be to go to the banya, the sauna with these guys, and just like realize that we're human beings. All right, now let's talk through things. And that does not sit well with political ideologues who just want to throw out their ideology and demonize everybody as the devil. And sometimes there's subtlety and nuance in life, and that's lacking in the politicians.
Absolutely. Time and time again through history, we have seen miracles. We have seen great things get resolved because there was true human empathy, not sympathy, but empathy.
Right.
And they were, one of my favorite stories, I think it was World War II, might have been World War I, but I think World War II, where it's during the Christmas season. And I think the Americans started singing Silent Night and the Germans joined in. And for an hour or two, they had peace. Everybody just chilled for 2 hours. And it's just amazing to me. And again, we see it over and over again. When Khrushchev took down the wall, when that happened, again, it wasn't because we came in there by force. It would have never worked. It was something that they finally decided, okay, you know what, let's do it. Whatever clicked.
It was Gorbachev. They were very lucky.
Thank you, Gorbachev.
They were very lucky to have him as the leader, because if it was someone else,
like Khrushchev,
it could have. Like if it was Khrushchev,
it
would. It's funny you say Khrushchev. I was, one of our senators from the great state of Texas is Ted Cruz, and he's voting on behalf of the Russians. And I was laughing today that he needs a nickname, Khrushchev, because that's that. Another Cuban American.
Yeah,
So,
so he's not he's not my favorite example of a Cuban American at the moment.
yeah, but these things are important, and I'll just use Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's the easy
Yes,
punching. When you have people like that, you can't govern. We're the most important nation in the history of humanity, and I do executive coaching with executives, and I was talking to a one in Australia, and all of my European business friends, Canadian and Japanese, all of them are like, Harry, what is going on in America? You have two octogenarians. One of them is like a mentally ill criminal, and one of them was too old when he was vice president, and he's still there. What is going on? And I think the solution, Bert, is the primary system that we have is panders to the partisan extremist, right? Like
yes,
if you have a partisan primary system, you're going to get the guy that all the extreme Republicans want and or all the extreme Democrats want. And our system doesn't reward appealing to the masses. I was a math major, so there's this thing called a bell curve
sure.
for your weight, for batting averages in baseball, for the height of everything's a bell curve, right? But the partisan primary system works for the extremes of that bell curve, but not for the fat part in the middle. They say in between the 20-yard lines or whatever. We're working for the 5 yards to the goal, but everybody in between the 20-yard lines it doesn't get represented. So we really need to change that. And I'm working with an organization. There's a thing called open primaries and ranked choice voting, and it's a way to have a system that, like, the candidates that appeal to the most people win. Right now, the candidates that appeal to the hardcore base of your party are the ones who win. And if unless we change that, it's going to be more of the same, and things will only get worse. You combine that with social media and algorithms, and we're in a really bad place. Like we have to fix this.
Absolutely. All right. So this organization, give us the name one more time and the website.
So it's actually Adam Kinzinger. He has an organization called Country First. I don't have the website off the top of my head, but we're doing a big reorganization. Country First is the website. There's another lady is the organization. Catherine Gale is a political professor. She's the one. I learned this at a lecture at Harvard a couple of years ago. Very, very smart lady. I had her on my podcast, Down to Earth with Terry Virts, a couple of years ago. Gehl is her last name. You could Google her and find her. She's really the kind of the intellectual brains behind what's happening. Several states have implemented it. I think New York City did ranked choice voting. Alaska did it, and they had a vote last year that Sarah Palin probably would have won in a normal primary, but a moderate won. So that's like one data point where it worked. And yeah, that's just, of all the woes, that if you could fix one thing, that would really go a long way. Right now, we're talking about aid for Ukraine. If we don't help Ukraine, Russia destroys our ally. There's millions of people have been refugees. Probably hundreds of thousands have been killed. There's a documentary called 20 Days in Mariupol. Highly recommended. It's nominated for an Oscar. It's incredible. It's very rough. It's about the first 20 days of the war. People are dying, but it lets you know what's happening. This is happening in Europe. And a lot of congressmen and senators, Khrushchev, one of them, would probably vote for it if it wasn't this hyper-partisan system that we have, right? So President Trump, they had a bill that it was like the strongest ever border security bill,
Right.
plus aid against Russia, China, and Iran. It's like the Republican wet dream. And Trump said, no, vote against it. I don't want to give Biden any victory.
Any points? Yeah.
And these guys that would have voted for it 100% didn't, because they're afraid of the orange man and they're afraid of getting primaried. If there were a ranked choice open primary system, nobody would have voted against it, even those who didn't like it, because they would have lost their primary. So in business, people do what you incentivize. If you give them a $10,000 bonus for parking a mile away. The really far away parking lot will be full every morning, right? So people do what they incentivize, and the incentive now is to be extreme. If you're a politician, and that's not good. We need to. We're having rule by minority in the country. It's not ruled by the majority doesn't get to rule things. It's Marjorie Taylor Greene gets to decide what happens, and that's a bad place for America. And all of our allies realize it. The American brand is down the toilet right now.
Sure.
I work with mid-level and high-level business executives around Earth. They are not impressed with what's going on in America, to say the least. Some of my colleagues from dictatorships and authoritarian states, you could probably guess, they admire some of the stuff we're doing, but 95% of the world's like middle class, business class is not impressed with what's happening here. The bad spot to be in.
Sure, absolutely. And this is an extraordinary situation because never would I have ever seen this, and never would I expect to see this in America, where one person holds so many people hostage without any kind of gun. I mean, literally, are you telling me that all these people are so afraid of pissing off Donald Trump, who most likely, I mean, he does have a chance to get back into power, but not a really good chance. I mean, however, it's like, I don't know. To me, it's like, why are they letting him control them, control their thinking, control their voting? It's like these guys should just get together and say, you know what, if we just ignore Donald Trump, if we don't give him any more power, guess what? He won't have any more power. And then we can get back to helping America. We can really put America first versus putting Donald Trump first.
Yeah.
And it's just, I know it's a psychological thing. I'm trying to remember what it's called when the hostage,
the Stockholm syndrome.
Thank you. Stockholm syndrome. That's what it reminds me of, that all these people have some variation of that, because really he has no power. He's not the president anymore. And if you don't put him back into power, what is he going to do? Well, he's going to jump on Truth Social and say, oh, you know, Bert and Terry are terrible people. Don't pay attention to them. Don't vote for them. But that's it. He has minimal power, but they give him all of their power. It's amazing.
You know, healthy political parties have debate. Unhealthy parties have witch hunts. And one of our parties is in the unhealthy category. You could probably guess which one. Steve Bannon back in 2016. Trump was, for all of his faults, was very smart about this. And Steve Bannon was very smart about this. They really figured out the secret sauce to get power. And it's by appealing to our worst angels, right? Like, the Republican message is a message of hate. It's a message of vengefulness. It's a message that appeals to all of the worst inside of us. And it works. And they've gotten tens of millions of people to vote for him. Now they lose. Trump lost in 2016 the popular vote. And every other election since then, he's either lost badly or underperformed what should have happened. Right. And almost like probably 90% of the candidates that he endorses lose. So he's continued his lifelong streak of losing, but he has a way of using other people's money to benefit himself, either in business or politically. And I mean, he's raised, I think, $50 million that have gone to lawyers. We literally, these MAGA, retirees are sending him $25 checks to go to his New York lawyer. $50 million spent on that. And
I think it's now surpassed the 50. I think it's getting close to like 70 or 80, but either way, whether it's 50 or 60,
it's a lot. Yeah.
It's a lot. And again, look, if I was going to support a politician, I don't want to pay for his legal bills. I don't want to pay for his medical bills. I don't want to pay for any of his bills. I want you to take my money and use it for what we agreed upon. Not
buy ads, street signs, whatever. Yeah.
Right. And so the fact that his supporters adore him, and of course the other side, I know there are supporters that because they vote the party line. I used to be a hardcore Republican, and about 30 years ago, the Republican Party and the insurance companies got together again, and they started passing all these laws that would diminish injured people's rights. And that's when I stopped being a hardcore Republican. I just could not imagine my party extinguishing the rights of people who have been injured. And I just thought, that has nothing to do with politics. That's anyway, not to go down
they're
that.
helping Russia. They're helping Russia destroy a European democracy.
Not only a European democracy, but again, our ally. And we need as many allies as we can get.
Yes. And so I'm actually working to also support an organization called No Labels. I don't know if have you heard of No Labels?
No. What is No Labels?
It's well, I think you're going to hear about us pretty soon. The basic premise is we're going to run what we're calling a unity ticket, a bipartisan presidential ticket, one Republican, one Democrat, assuming that it's Biden-Trump, and it's looking like it's going to be Biden-Trump. The Biden-Trump matchup is like the most historically unpopular presidential race in the history of unpopular presidential races. It's something like 2/3 of Americans don't want to see this. Obviously, there's some small diehard Trump fans, and of course the liberal Democrats want Biden, but most of that bell curve does not want it. So we're looking for, A-list, well-known, established Republicans and Democrats that have already been vetted. They've already held out, serious candidates, not Ross Perot, not like some crazy guy with a lot of money, but actual legitimate candidates. So we'll see where it goes. I would expect, I don't know. I don't work for No Labels. I'm just supporting them. So I don't know when they're going to have the announcement, but it'll have to be soon. The race is heating up. But the idea is to put and that would be a really interesting way of governing with say, hypothetically, a Republican president and Democratic vice president and a cabinet that was made of both. And it would really, it threatens the established parties, which I think is a good, and so.
I mean, think about it, Terry. If all of a sudden you had a bipartisan presidency administration, you had a bipartisan cabinet, the squabbling would, huh?
And yeah, imagine that. And not Marjorie Taylor Greene and AOC in the same cabinet. That would never work. But
that would never work, right?
There's a lot of good Republicans. I know some of them. There's good Democrats. I text some of them. And so if those types of people were in office, and they wouldn't always agree, and sometimes somebody would have to say, appreciate the input, but this is what's going to happen. But but yes, again, like you, I don't know, I stuffed envelopes for Ronald Reagan when I was in high school, but that party's gone. So
yeah. I tell you what, I was very impressed. You mentioned Adam Kissinger. What is it?
Kinzinger. Yeah.
Thank you, Kissinger. Mm-hmm. My English is my second language, guys. So anyway, but I thought that both him and I should say him and Liz Cheney and a few other people stood up, not for the Republican Party, but for democracy. They stood up for America. Yeah. And I was impressed. Liz Cheney, I think she really showed her honor, her integrity, the fact that she really wanted to do right by the people, and she was willing to lose the race or lose her position there. She reduced the amount of campaigning that she was able to do. And of course, the MAGA supporters did their best to oust her, which they finally did. But I think, she mentions this multiple times that eventually these people will be judged by their children and their grandchildren and history and stuff like that.
History will remember it. They're shamed. She has more balls than Lindsey Graham, Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, Kevin McCarthy. All these guys completely put party over country.
Well, I would say they put Donald Trump over party. It's like Trump, party, America. Because
there's the gold, silver, and bronze medal. Trump, party, America. Yeah,
because if they put the party first, I think they would have said, okay, let's get rid of Donald Trump. If they were putting the party first, they would say, look, this guy is not really about the party. He's not about America. He's not about the people. Let's get him out. But no, it's Trump, party, then America. And I think dead on about Lindsey Graham. Just a flip flopper, and it's just amazing. Again, Stockholm syndrome, because these guys are being held hostage, or they're now in alliance with their hostage taker. They can't seem to shake it. They have no reason, and I just love the excuses they came up with. January 6th, at first, everybody was agreeing that, that was a riot. Maybe it
Yeah.
was an insurrection that was totally unlawful. It was chaotic. People were hurt. It was the worst of America. This is just unacceptable. A few months later, it wasn't that bad. It was actually peaceful. Oh, no, it's worse than peaceful. It was instigated by the federal government. This is
Yeah.
something that was
It was
set
Nikki
up.
Haley's fault because she could have called the National Guard out, but she didn't, and she didn't secure the Capitol when she was in charge of the Capitol. Of course, it was Nancy Pelosi, not Nikki Haley, but Donald Trump's failing octogenarian brain got those two confused. Yes.
Yes, I love the fact that she now that what now it's been, whatever, a couple of years, and now it is Nancy Pelosi's fault. I just thought that was like the best. It's like,
It's like 20 years ago, the Democrats hated George Bush with such a passion. Like everything was W's fault. We used to joke
yes,
about my flight's canceled today. George Bush, damn it, he got he caused this weather, the clouds to come in. Yeah. And now, anyway, yeah, we're in a real mess right now.
yeah, it's incredible. I have, and I say this with all sincerity, with all humility, and I would love everybody to join me in this, and that is, I have never prayed harder for America and our leaders than I do on a regular basis now. It is the only thing I think that will help us is to hopefully get some spiritual intervention. Uh, there's we need a miracle. And really the miracle, and I know I'm going to get a lot of crap for this, if Biden and Donald Trump both passed away peacefully in their sleep, boom, that would solve all sorts of issues, and maybe it would reboot the parties and we can get back to taking care of business.
Or, like I said, if no labels, and amen, I agree. We need real prayer, not this kind of perverted Christian GOP thing.
Right.
That's not Jesus, as an old Wayne Watson song from 30 years ago. But uh no labels is another option. I
Yeah,
mean,
I'll check out No Labels. I'll see. We'll invite some of their leaders on. I want to check it out. I've not heard of
yeah,
them.
I think a lot of, unless you're a inside baseball kind of political person, you probably haven't been following it. They've been on Meet the Press and all the Sunday morning shows, and so they've generated a lot of interest. The Democrats especially are really freaking out because they think that we're going to take votes from Biden. But the reality is, the polling we've shown has shown that we take votes from both sides because we're kind of in the middle. Folks like Jill Stein and Cornel West, the super radical left-wing Green Party, they're clearly going to take votes from Biden.
Sure.
No Trump voter is going to vote for Cornel West, right? RFK Jr. is going to probably get a lot of votes. He'll probably get 5 or 10%. I don't know what he's going to get, something like that. But he appeals to the anti-vaxxers, conspiracy theory, the moon or the government's whatever. So I think he's going to hurt Trump more than he hurts Biden. That's the kind of voter. But the no labels, if you put like a reasonably adult from each party, I think that will appeal to a pretty broad part of Americans. And Americans want, the only reason that no labels is doing this is because people clearly want something different. We're sick of Biden, we're sick of Trump, and we want, some adults that can work together. I remember it was Ted Cruz, and he said he was tired of talking about this thing. We needed to really focus on our enemy that we could defeat, and that was the Democrats. And I'm like, the Democrats aren't our enemy. The Democrats are Americans. Like Russia is our enemy. North Korea is our enemy. Democrats are Democrats. They're not
Right.
the enemy. And that worldview that the other guys are the enemy. The enemy is somebody you kill. I was an F-16 pilot. You're not nice to the enemy. You kill them. And that's how the political system worldview is nowadays, but that needs to change.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So I want to talk about space.
Let's talk about something fun.
uh, yeah, I want to talk about space. First of all, when did you start thinking about going in outer space?
I tell this story a lot. I've written. I got a new kids book out, The
Oh,
Astronaut's Guide.
okay.
Yeah, so it's like an illustrated elementary school, middle school kind of age. And I tell the story that my first book that I read was about space. It was I think it was a cardboard book with like one line. I just remember reading about Apollo and the moon program. But I was hooked. I grew up with posters of the space shuttle and galaxies and nebula and stuff like that. It was something I wanted to do ever since I was little.
That is cool. Yeah, absolutely. All right. So give us, and I know this is probably repetitious for you, but it's our first time talking. So give us your, I don't know, a quick, doesn't have to be quick, but an overview of here you are in space and you're being flooded with all these emotions. You're just, it must be overwhelming and your dopamine is through the roof. I mean, how was that experience?
That you just described the very first minutes in space. Like during launch, it was still amazing to see the shuttle did this roll to heads up maneuver, and I looked out and I could see I-95 on the east coast of America. Um, the biggest chapter in my first book, I did a National Geographic book called View from Above, was about the 8-minute launch. So many stories, but once I got into space, the blue sunrise, you can't see it. I have some photos in my studio here. The blue sunrise that I remember thinking, I've never seen that shade of blue before. It was just so gorgeous. And the shuttle has liquid hydrogen, liquid oxygen fuel. And so it freezes once you get into the vacuum and darkness of space. And of course, the shuttle's banging and there's rockets firing. And so this ice breaks into thousands of little pieces. And as we were flying into sunrise, this ice cloud was around the shuttle. And the sun was reflecting off of this ice. So there were all these like spectacular, it looked like diamonds just reflecting all around us. It was amazing. I'm seeing like a color of blue that I've never seen before, and I'm surrounded by this cloud of glass. And we were upside down at the time flying over the Alps, and the Alps were like, every few seconds we were crossing a mountain. And because I remember when I lived in Germany, it took like an hour to go to the next mountain, and these are going by every couple of seconds. So that was my first few minutes in space. And I had to go, all right, focus. You have to fly the space shuttle. You're the pilot. Like, stop looking out the window because you got to fly the shuttle. It was very distracting because it's so beautiful.
Yeah, that, again, I know more or less the science behind flight, but I still marvel at the fact that these tin cans, if you will, you're a pilot and you've flown some of the most powerful jets and stuff like that, as well as the commander of the space shuttle. But I'm always amazed that we get these heavy aircrafts in the air and we land them safely. And I would love to do a space shuttle and just go up there. And I'm kind of geeking out that we have not one, not two, but 3 different billionaires trying to make space a commercial flight. It's just what a wonderful time to be around, right?
It's, if you sell some more ad space on the podcast, you can buy a ticket to space. The Bezos rocket and the Virgin Galactic rocket are both, taking paying passengers.
Yeah.
And there's a company called Axiom that they've been launching about once or twice a year private missions to the space station. So for 55 million, you can actually go to the International Space Station and spend a couple of weeks.
For just 55 million. Wow, that's pretty I
think if you get 2 seats, you can get a discount. I don't know. You have to negotiate with them.
Yeah. I'll just let me jump right on that. Pull that out of my
It's a lot of podcasting you're gonna have to do.
A lot of podcasting or yeah, absolutely. All right. So let me ask you this. I have I like to compete and I like to set some big goals and stuff like that. But I've noticed that like a couple of years ago, I was in a couple of competitions. I came in first in one of them, did fourth in another one, and I mean I was high for like a month off of these 2 races. but then I crashed, right? They talk about the dopamine crashing and it's got to
Yeah.
reset. Do you guys go through the same thing after you guys come through that
Yeah.
whole
You know, I was
space
really
thing?
worried. I was worried about that. After my first shuttle flight, I wanted to go back. It was cool. It was only 2 weeks. I was ready to go back. Then I went back about 4 years. It took 4 or 5 years for me to fly again with the Russians. I was there for 200 days on my second flight. And I remember you land in Kazakhstan, it's 24 hours to get back to Houston. And when I made it back to Houston, the first thing I did was I went to the gym to do my workout, and I was super dizzy. It was miserable, but I did my rehab. And my son was there. My son was 16. He had gotten his driver's license while I was in space. So after all this, he's like, Dad, let's go car shopping. So I got I went in the car, he drove, and we went to the Ford dealership and looked at F-150s. He ended up getting a Mustang. He bought a used Mustang. It's pretty cool. Um, and I remember as we were driving there, driving under the highway, I-45 in Houston, you're from Houston.
Yes.
I thought, I'm on Earth. Like, I'm back on Earth. I remember this is NASA Road 1. It's all there's the McDonald's, I was back on Earth, and I was so happy because I thought I'd be depressed and it would mess with my brain. And I know a lot of my colleagues, I always joke that astronauts' favorite mission is their next mission.
Sure.
Like they all they care about is their next mission. And for me, I was like, well, that was great, but there's other things I want to do in life. I've got some film and TV projects I want to do. I'm obviously passionate about politics. Business, I'm really interested in business, and I'm doing some coaching and consulting. So I was glad that for me personally, after my second flight, 7 months in space, I was ready to hang up the cleats. After the first flight, I was not.
That's incredible. Yeah. Um, yeah, that's, the thought of, again, I've already talked about this. We can get a man to space. We can get a man to the International Space Station. We've gotten men to what do you call it, to the moon, but yet here on Earth, we can't seem to manage our way out of a paper bag sometimes. It's just incredible.
Well, it was funny to put that in perspective that I was at NASA for 16 years, and that was enough. I had done everything there was to do. It was easy. I had all the jobs. I knew everybody. I just knew everything. There was no more learning left for me to do. I could have, and the boss called me and he's like, well, you can get back in line. It'll be about 5 years before your next flight. And then I would have done the same thing over again. I literally would have, it wasn't like we were going to the moon anytime soon. So I was ready for another challenge. And I think that's a great philosophy for Congress. Like after 12 years or 18 years or whatever the number is, like that's enough time. You can move on, do your lobbying. Supreme Court, same thing. If everybody was 18 years, senator could get 3 terms. The Supreme Court, every president would get 2 picks unless somebody died. But if you're 18 years in Congress, you can be committee chairman and whatever. That's more than enough time.
Sure.
Like maybe less, maybe 12 years, maybe 16 years. I don't know what the right answer is, but you want to give them enough time to, get good at what they're doing. And the leaders need to have some experience. I get that, but they don't need to be 80 years old. So I think we need term limits and an age limit also for the House, the Senate, and the Supreme Court.
Sure. I mean, here in Arizona, they'll give you, we're famous for our driver's license. I believe I don't have to renew my driver's license until I'm 75.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I mean, if you come here, once you get past a certain age, they give you this ridiculous expiration date. To me, it doesn't make sense, because how can you assume that I'm going to be okay to drive? I'm 60 now. So if I don't have to renew my driver's license till I'm 70 or 75, well, what happens in between then? A lot can happen. What's kind of comical to me is both parties will tell you they believe in term limits.
Yeah.
Now, we have both parties that agree that we should have term limits and campaign reform. And these are basically the only 2 things that our parties agree on, but yet we can't seem to pass either term limits or campaign reform. Talk about just
They say that, but the
yes,
reality, I mean, I've talked to the inside, I've been in the smoky room. They don't want that.
of course
If
not.
if somebody's there for 30 years, that's how the lobbyists, they develop relationships and they grease the skids. And campaign finance reform, then they can't give them money. And when you give them money, blah, blah, blah. And these poor congressmen, it's a terrible life. It's a horrendous life. If you
Yes.
have to run for the House, you have to run every 2 years. And you spend half your time, literally 50% of your time on the phone asking for money. It's a continuous ask for money. And the ones who say crazy stuff, like Marjorie Taylor Greene can say something crazy and she'll raise $1 million from around the country. But the normal kind of Clark Kent, normal kind of congressman, they don't have the followers. They're not saying crazy stuff. They don't get all the Twitter donations. And so it's a really, it's a really bad system.
Yeah, it is. It is. Uh, I've had the opportunity to sit down on two occasions with Senator Hatch, and I think he passed away last year at like 96.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, you know, unless you own the company, there aren't too many professions that are going to have a 96-year-old on payroll. And I
If
think
you're in
that,
the company, you're going to hire a CEO. You're just the, yes.
yeah, you're going to be the chairman, retired, whatever. But the thing about it is, not only not only should there be term limits, but I think if you cared about your constituents, if you cared about your country, you would just step down. I mean, look, you're 96-year-old. How much more wheeling and dealing? How much more power can you get at 96? You've got one foot in the grave and the other foot sliding into the grave.
I was talking to a congressman that probably everybody's heard of and knows. And he said, Terry, the problem is this is the coolest job these people have ever had.
Sure.
It's cool to be a congressman and you're on TV and you're in power. We were talking about me running, and I was like, oh, this would be like number 4 or 5 on my list of cool jobs that I've had there, or lower, and that's what it should be. It should be like public service. I'm going to give up my business career or my military career or my acting, whatever it is you're doing, go serve for a few terms and then come back and be done. And that's what the founders intended. And the founders lived to age 55, and then by our age, they were dead, right? And now you live forever. RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, is like
Yes.
the heroine of the left, right? She's badass. All the women are in love with her. They have books for little girls and T-shirts, and the notorious RBG. Her selfishness kept her in office until she died. She could have retired when Obama was president. They would have put a liberal justice in, but instead she hung on. Trump got that pick. And now we have the Supreme Court. Now we have a 6-3 Supreme Court. So it's the selfishness that you're the only guy that can win. Like Biden, I don't think Biden's going to win. He's so old, and the border's been such a disaster. And he'll only have himself to blame. Like, he could have bowed out and let a young crop of 50-year-old Democrats fight it out. So the ego and the focus on self above country is profound, and it's not a Republican or Democrat thing. It's both.
It's both. Yeah, and I agree with you. I think that Biden made the statement that if Trump doesn't run, I won't run because I'm the only one who can beat Trump. Are you really? I mean, I don't think Kamala can beat Trump, but those aren't our only choices. We have some good people that can beat Trump. And the same thing to the Republican Party. Really, Trump is your go-to choice? I mean, let's dig.
All the polls show Nikki Haley beating Biden by 10 to 15 points, if not more. All of them. And Trump and Biden are neck and neck. So if Joe Biden really is the devil and we have to beat him, then nominate Nikki Haley and she'll beat him handily.
Right.
But they keep on nominating the serial loser of the century, of the last 2 centuries. And I was talking, I thought long and hard about running this past this cycle right now. And I talked to a 20-year campaign manager veteran And we came down to, Terry, you can't win because you're normal, and you have to win a Republican or the primary. You have to be crazy, and you're
You have to be
so
extreme. Yeah.
I couldn't win and he said the only reason you should run is if you have a serious mental defect where you have to be the center of attention and you have to be talking all the time and everything has to be about you all the time. And if you have a serious problem with narcissism, then you should run. But if he said, you seem like a normal guy, and I don't think that's for you. So it was an interesting insight from somebody. He's worked on presidential campaigns. He's done like the county commissioner board campaign, all levels for 20 years. That was his advice. Unless you have a mental defect of narcissism, you probably shouldn't be a politician.
Yeah. Especially nowadays. There was and I can't remember what party he belonged to, but he was a young senator or at least a young congressman. And he was trying to live within the budget, the payroll budget that he's afforded as a elected official. And he says that he had to sleep in his office, and he made headlines. I think he only got that one term because he was normal. And right. He tried, and he denounced the fact that the only reason that these other people have these houses is because they're getting so much money from other sources. But if they stayed within their right. their payroll budget, they can't afford anything there.
And so I don't know what the House members make, probably 170, something like that.
Right.
Which is a good salary, right?
Yeah.
They're also running a $4 or $5 trillion company, and they have to have two houses. You have to keep a place in your district, and then you have to keep a place in DC, which is like incredibly expensive. I think the rent there is, I don't know, for a really bad place, it's $3,000 a month. For like an okay place, that's $5,000 a month. And yeah, it adds up pretty quickly. And so it's not a job that most people would want to do. And then you're just getting, your personal life is getting attacked all the time. A friend of mine's running against one of the crazy members, and Adam Frisch is a friend of mine, and he was running against Lauren Boebert. He almost beat her last time, lost by a couple hundred votes in a very solid red district. He almost beat her. And he's doing so well now that she actually left the district. She changed districts because she doesn't want to run again. So he told me that for 24 months in a row, he's been home 5 days a month.
Wow.
He's just out fundraising. He's out going to the Moose Lodge and the school board and, driving around. He has a huge club. He has like half of Colorado and Colorado 3. It's a terrible life. And thankfully he was a businessman. So he's earned his money before he can afford to go without a salary for 2 years and drive around. It's a terrible life that these guys do. So I guess cut him some slack.
Sure.
Yeah.
What amazes me that some of these other people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Ted Cruz, why don't they're comfortable being the follower. They don't want to be the leader. In other words, they don't have the, I don't know if they don't have the talent, the courage, or what to run for president. So, but hey, right here, I'm pretty comfortable. I have quite a bit of power. I get a lot of perks. I get to, I get quite a bit. So I'm just going to stay here, and I can, I can support whoever I want to support or demonize whoever I want to demonize. And I always thought that to be a little weird, because if you're this outspoken, why not just run for the office? Just go for it. And anyway, real quick, going back to the space stuff, right before your first mission, do you sit down with your family and say, okay, I'm going up in space? And because you got to prepare for the worst. I mean,
yeah.
There is a chance that you may not make it. Space is dangerous. Flying is dangerous. So do you have that conversation? What is that like?
Well, I had been attached to the Columbia families we call them family escort. I was there to help the wives and kids while the astronauts were in space. And then of course, Columbia didn't make it back. So I was very intimately involved in that disaster. So I was very aware that this might happen. And we didn't talk about it. I wrote some letters. So I have some letters that were never delivered, thank God. Um, but yeah, it's a serious issue. I actually wrote and directed a short film about this topic last year. Hopefully it'll get turned into something much bigger. But yeah, it's something that is staring you in the face. Knock on wood, it's been 20 years since we've had an accident, but it's when they talk about, is the rocket safe or what level of safety? Safe is the wrong adjective to use when you're talking about a rocket. It's like, how dangerous is it? We want it as least dangerous as possible, not as safe as possible. It's
Right.
a it's a it's a it's a risky uh profession for sure.
Let me ask you, because there's some people that think we're wasting our time and money flying to outer space, visiting the International Space Station that is, I forgot how old it is, but it's pretty old.
Yeah.
Do you think there's still a valid reason to keep going in outer space?
One of the things, if you advertise the cost of the shuttle program or station program and divide it by how many people flew, each of my missions was about $1 billion. And I'm very thankful to American taxpayers for spending $1 billion to launch me into space on each of my flights. But I noticed when we got there, the space shuttle, we're in orbit. You open up the payload bay doors to let the radiators out to cool the shuttle down. If the payload bay doors are shut, you only can last like an hour or a couple hours. You have to land immediately. And when we opened them up, we didn't launch $1 billion $1 bills out into space. All that money was spent here on Earth, right? So the money that we spend at NASA really does get reinvigorated into the economy. It allows an economy of engineers and scientists and managers and secretaries and all the support people to keep the space program going. So there is a lot of benefit, but it is expensive. It's billions of dollars. It's less than 1/2 of 1% of our federal budget, and that includes the space station, that includes sending probes to Mars, that includes the Webb telescope, it includes a lot of Earth observation to monitor the climate. So I think the public gets a pretty good return on that investment. And without jobs in space, there wouldn't be people studying engineering and science to support those. They need to have a job or they would be studying accounting or whatever, criminology or whatever. So there's a lot of advantages. Plus, you can look at the world and you can look at countries that don't have space programs and countries that do. And I'd rather be if you look at that list, I'd rather be on this side of the ledger of countries that do have space programs.
I agree with you. I think we still are innovating. What is your take when you first heard that Elon Musk was going to start doing this private stuff into space? Were you pro? Were you con? Were you suspicious? What was your
I was
initial
cautious.
reaction?
Yeah, I was cautious. This was 2005. The administrator at the time was a guy named Mike Griffin. He had a program called COTS, Commercial Off the Shelf. And so SpaceX was basically bankrupt. They had blown up a couple of rockets, and Mike gave Elon a contract for, it was like $100 million or $200 million. It was a smallish contract, but that was like literally he was able to make payroll that month because of this contract. And that was 2005. When I was the robotics branch chief at NASA in charge of the robotic arm, in 2011, SpaceX was delivering cargo to the space station. So it was literally a handful of years. They went from having this little Falcon 1 rocket that blew up all the time to there's a cargo ship docking on the space station, astronauts grabbing it with a robotic arm. He went incredibly fast. That same year, 2005, NASA came up with a program called Constellation. It was the government program to go to the moon. It was actually a great idea. Mike had the architecture, was really smart. I remember thinking, oh my God, like that kind of makes sense. And then the next president canceled it, and then but they didn't really cancel it. Most of it's still there because the Congress wouldn't let. Anyway, it became the SLS, which we joke stands for Senate Launch System. So that just a few months ago launched for the first time. So Elon went from 2005 to 2011 delivering cargo to the space station. The Constellation program went from 2005 to 23 launching the first rocket, but it's only half a rocket because they don't have the upper stage yet. And it was unmanned. There was no astronauts on board. And it's going to be another probably, I don't know how long, 5 years or more until they actually land people on the moon. So you can contrast the difference between a government program and a private industry program when it's run properly.
Sure, sure. Should we be going back to the moon? I mean, people talk about, especially again, Elon Musk talks about having a station on the moon and then going on to Mars.
Yeah. So
what's your take on this?
I'm a test pilot, and they taught us the build-up approach. So you don't just, when the Boeing 787 takes off for the first time, you don't fly from Seattle to Tokyo. You don't even raise the gear. You take off, you leave the gear down, you come around, you land. And then the next flight, you stay up 5 minutes longer. And then the third flight, you raise the gear and you put it back down. And, you take your time building this thing up. And the moon is a great build-up point. It would be really good to go land there, practice building bases, practice your landing technique, practice everything you need to know before you go to Mars and beyond. The problem is it's really expensive to go there. And the architecture that we have is designed to land 4 people. Apollo only landed 2. And that means these landers are huge and they require lots of refueling in Earth orbit before you go to the moon. And I'm afraid that we've designed an architecture that's too big. And our deficit is exploding. Like, it's really bad. We've been saying the deficit was bad ever since Ross Perot 30 years ago. The deficit really is bad. COVID kind of put us over the limit, and it's not slowing down. I mean, the Biden deficits are over $1 trillion a year, well over $1 trillion a year. So there's just not a lot of spare change to be spending on space exploration because we don't have to go to the moon. We have to have schools. We have to have a military. We have to pay the interest on the debt. It's a nice to have, not a must have. So,
yeah. You mentioned Ross Perot a couple of times. I think that Ross Perot today would do well because he's out, he's kind of out on that fringe. Hey, everybody.
That was a great thing. People don't understand. I've been mad at Ross for the last 30 years because I thought he gave the election to Clinton. Since I've been working with No Labels, there was a CBS poll like the day after the election. He actually took equally from Clinton and George H.W. Bush. I think it was 34% for Clinton, 34% for Bush, would have voted for Bush, and the remaining 26%, 28%, whatever the numbers are, the remaining wouldn't have voted at all. So he took from both sides. He didn't get into the election until February 22nd is when he announced. And by June, he was leading he was ahead of Clinton and Bush. He had 39% in June. So in like 4 months, he was winning. And then he quit. And most people don't remember this. I had forgotten this. He pulled out of the election in July because he thought the parties were out to get him. I don't know. It was a bad idea to pull out. And then
he had, I believe, because I remember that. I remember him saying that
it was unfair.
He was in fear of his family and
right,
some weird conspiracy, and so he was dropping out.
And then in October, he got back in the race, and he also had Admiral Stockdale as vice president.
Oh, that was such a bad pick.
God bless him, American hero, one of the best human beings, best Americans in our history. Should not have been on the ticket. He had dementia, and it was very obvious. And he could be running for president today, but not in 1992. So all of that, he still got 19% of the vote, right? Yeah. Got in it late. He was kind of crazy.
He was.
Had a bad vice president, dropped out of the race, and he still got 19%. And that was at a time when it was about a third Democrat, a third Republican, and a third independent. Nowadays, it's about a quarter Democrat, a quarter Republican, and half independent. Like the percentage of independents is really, really high. Just like, religion, just like all institutions, people are kind of getting rid of them, right? And there's as many independents as there are Republicans plus Democrats. And so if there's ever been a time for a candidate like the No Labels ticket, I think and with 2 historically terrible, for very different reasons. But I'm not equating Biden and Trump in any way, but they're both very unpopular. So I think,
They both need to be whatever word you want to use, disqualified, removed. They just need to go away.
yeah,
One's too old, and one, whatever you want to call the other one. I mean, let me tell you, I've talked
he's
to a
a
lot of,
mentally ill criminal. How about that?
yeah, yeah. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. And I,
But he's too old too, by the way.
yes,
His mental gaffes are terrible. Like I was listening to a podcast today. They were just saying the things that he says are crazy. So he's forceful and he has energy and he has this manner. He doesn't seem as old man as Biden does, but he's mentally not there.
I
Like,
don't think either of them are mentally there. I think Trump, not only is he failing mentally, but then he's got that criminal element to him, that narcissistic.
yeah,
I must be in power. He's only running for the presidency because he wants to get even with everybody that has run against him, that he feels is his enemy.
he said
He's
as
not.
much.
What's that?
He said it. That's what he says. Like he
Right.
doesn't hide it.
He
That's
doesn't hide it. And you know what? And I appreciate about that about Trump. Whatever he's thinking, it just comes out. I mean, literally, no filter. There's whatever. And I tell you, when you look at the 2016 campaign, his message was very clear, very succinct. Make America great again. And he
right.
had points. I'm going to bring back, jobs. I'm going to do this. I'm going to be tough on
Build
China.
a
Blah
wall.
blah blah. He had three or
Build a
four
wall.
points. And
Yeah.
I think that was definitely good from a marketing standpoint of view. And again, a lot of people don't know this, but Ronald Reagan was the first president to use "Let's Make America Great Again." So that was borrowed from our beloved Ronald Reagan. But now he doesn't have a message for America other than revenge. And every now and then he kind of goes, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna do something about jobs and immigration, but revenge. I must have revenge. I'm gonna be the dictator for a day, maybe two at the most, a year at the outside."
Right. Look, we're flirting with something you should not flirt with.
Right.
And the problem is not with Trump. The problem is with the tens of millions of people. But I understand if you don't like Biden, I totally get that.
Sure.
But Trump is the wrong man for the job. You got Nikki Haley. If you just want somebody that's going to be like small government and, strong military and tighten up the immigration system, vote for Nikki Haley.
Right. Well, you know what? Look. And to your point, both of these guys are so old. Let's get some fresh energy in there.
Uh,
You know, there's no reason. I think Biden's like what 82, and then Trump's like 78 or something like that.
yeah.
They're both in their, roughly they're both in their 80s, one way or the
Yeah.
other. They're fairly
They
close.
both will be in this next term. Yeah.
Yes, and they're not doing well. I mean, look, Trump is obese. I don't know. I tell you, I'm impressed with his level of energy. Now,
Yeah.
he has forever said, I don't do drugs, I don't drink. And I
Yeah.
used to believe him, but now that I've gotten to know him as a president, I don't believe anything he says because he lies so much. So maybe he's mainlining caffeine, or maybe
Right.
he's a coke fiend or whatever. But the guy has an abundance of energy, and I have to give him props for that. He does have tons of energy. And when he speaks like he knows what he's talking about, like he's confident. This is the way it is. The grass is green and the sky is blue. And if you vote for me, the grass will continue to be green. I'm the only one that can make the grass green and the sky blue. You got to vote for me, because if not, the world goes to hell in a handbasket. And then, then you have Biden, who, again, is definitely showing wear and tear. He's, like you said, he was too old when he was vice president. And I think that the Democrats are doing a great disservice to America by not just saying, look, Joe, time to move on. You've done a great job. Thank you for your service. Let's get somebody else in here that can tackle not only Trump, but the problems that we're having. Because we're having a lot of problems, and they're all big.
Yeah. Well, and Biden somehow gets he's tough on Ukraine. He's actually been amazingly weak on Ukraine. The North Star, the North Star for this administration has been timidity and fear and don't upset the Russians.
Right.
And that's not how you defeat the Russians. Like it's been so painful. It took us a year, 12 months to get them one Patriot battery. It took us a year and a half to give them 31 M1 tanks. A year and a half. The whole Russian army is rolling around Ukraine, and we just won't give it to them because we don't want to escalate. We finally gave them HIMARS missiles, but the short-range versions, not the ones they really need. We still have not given them ATACMS. They still don't have F-16s. And I don't know that we're going to give them all the weapons they need. An F-16 is fine, but what really matters is the weapons that come along with it, right?
Sure.
So Jake Sullivan and the Biden administration have been so timid. If Ukraine loses this war, it's because of them. It's because they delayed and delayed. This counteroffensive that quote unquote failed. Of course it failed. They don't have air superiority. Like, you can't defeat the Russian army without air superiority. There's no possible way to do that. And they don't have it because we could have given them stuff that would have helped. I'm not saying they would have just rolled over them, but they would have done much better had we actually given them what they needed. And Biden has been way too weak. It's the democratic way of the world. They're always timid. They were just talking about Iran. Iran armed Hamas. They are the reason why Israel got attacked. They've been arming Hezbollah for years. They've been arming the Houthis for years. They blew up a Saudi refinery a couple of years ago. It was terrible. Literally, the global economy is getting crushed because of Iranian missiles and the Houthis. And Europe is pitiful. They don't have a navy. Europe can't take care of it. America has to go take care of it. Only 10% of our trade goes through the Red Sea, but all of Europe's does. So anyway, in 160 attacks on American facilities until finally one of them killed our soldiers tragically last month. 160. And Jake Sullivan and the Biden administration were out of their way to make sure that the whole world knows that we're not here to escalate. We don't want a war with Iran. We're not escalate. Why do you tell them that? Maybe we do want a war with Iran. Maybe the Iranian Navy is going to the bottom of the ocean. Maybe you shouldn't have been fomenting evil for 50 years in the area. Don't tell them what you're not going to do. Tell them, actually, Iran,
The opposite.
you probably ought to fire up your surface to air missiles because it's about to happen. It's about to get real. But so okay, so that was a really long answer of why Biden is weak on foreign affairs. Trump is treasonous. He's not weak. He's treasonous. He's like on the side of the bad guys. At least Biden is weakly fighting back. Trump is like promoting the bad guys. So we need a better answer badly.
Absolutely. Trump would do really well, and he should consider going to
Riker?
I was going to say there's several places in South America that would just embrace him. I mean, look, I don't know why, but South America has had a tremendous, long-standing love affair with dictators. They just, the Hispanic people. I'm saying this as a Hispanic. You can look at their history, and they just go from one dictator to the other. And man, they love them, and then they love to complain about them. Anyway, listen, we're out of time. I want to thank you so much, Terry, for stopping by. And anything that I can do to promote, to help, reach out to me. I'll be glad to promote and help. And maybe you can help me get some of these other people on the show. But anyway, thank you so much for stopping by. And I just had a fun time getting to know you and learning about your experiences.
This is a lot of fun. Thanks for having me on. We probably could have talked for many more hours. It could have been a Rogan.
Absolutely. Yes, it would have been 2-3 hours at least.